What's going on, everybody? Today we're breaking down all things about the 2025 Jacksonville Jaguars, so get your Duval calls ready. We're talking about if the wide receiver room is big enough for both Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter to ball out in Fantasyland. Could this finally be the year that Trevor Lawrence lives up to his generational billing? What running back to target? Could Brenton Strange be a thing? All that and much, much more here on today's Fantasy Life show, but I cannot accomplish all this alone. Accordingly, I'm joined by Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, the man with the best hair in the industry. It is Dwain, the Rock McFarland. So Dwain, going to kick things off with a wide receiver room that, people are hyped about. Brian Thomas Jr., really freaking good. Travis Hunter, really good. Liam Cohen, seemingly the next big thing at the position. Why can't both BTJ and Hunter ball the heck out in 2025?
Yeah, they both can for the reason you just said. They're both really good. And there's not a lot of target competition here. Yeah, we like Dyami Brown as like a last dart, going to get a lot of routes kind of guy in a best ball draft. But man, he's got a 14% targets per route run over the last 3 seasons. That's like wide receiver 6, 7 territory. So look, no disrespect to Dyami Brown, like has some speed, does some yak stuff. So he's a nice complementary player, but he's not going to take targets away from these two guys. Brenton Strange, we can't completely dismiss a year 3 breakout for the tight end. He had a 20% targets per route run last year. Targets per route run. If you look at his yards per route run, also we're really kind of in that low end tight end 1 territory. Was a 2nd round pick with the 61st pick in the 2023 draft out of Penn State. So maybe he'll do a little something. But man, he's not going to compare to the top 2 guys. Brian Thomas Jr., you talked about him a little bit. You guys looking here on the screen, 144 targets last year, 274 fantasy points per game. But man, he really got cooking late in the season, Ian. So if we look at week 8, that's when Christian Kirk went down, left the lineup. Then we had Brian Thomas Jr. battling this chest injury, and we thought he might go on IR. We didn't know if it was a shoulder, if it was a chest. Ultimately, he ends up playing through that, but didn't really do much in those 2 games. So I'm just going to look at week 11 through the rest of the season based on that data. 33% target share, Ian, 2.70 yards per route run, 21.5 fantasy points per game over that stretch. He had a utilization score of 93 out of 100. You guys just heard me. Yes, I did say 93. It's no longer a 9.3 and a 10.0. We're going to 93 out of 100 because guess what? People know what a Madden rating is, and we just wanted to make it similar to something like that. So still calculated the same way. We're just multiplying it by 10, so no big secret there, but really, really good performance for Brian Thomas Jr. down the stretch. So Travis Hunter, the number 2 pick overall in the NFL draft. Now, how much of that is due to being a cornerback versus a receiver, versus a guy that can just do it all? Like, we don't know for sure. But in the rookie supermodel, Ian, he came out with a rating of 93. That's the 5th best score going back to 2008. If you look at his draft capital, came out at a 92. Guys, remember in the supermodel, everything's on a scale of 50 to 100. His production at Colorado rated as an 87, and then his film grade was a 91. And Matt Harmon also co-signing on Mr. Travis Hunter, really likes him. So we look at the comparison hit rates for similar prospects from the supermodel, Ian. Guys that went on to have a top 12 wide receiver finish in their first 3 years, 30% of them, top 24 finish, 80% of them, top 36, 100% of them. Now, so far, he's been focusing on offense first, but we're starting to hear a little bit more and more about the defense. How much time is he going to play on the D? Also kind of sounds like it might be this scenario where it comes down to a game-by-game thing as to how much they need him on offense versus how much they need him on defense. So there's certainly some uncertainty there. And, Ben Gretsch, really smart guy in the fantasy community, I heard him talking about it, and he had made a point, and he said, really the best path to like future big earnings for Travis Hunter is you play some on both sides of the ball. You turn into a really good wide receiver 2 or 3, but then you're also a really good cornerback. Maybe you're not the elite at either spot, but you're really good at both spots. Like, that's probably the best path to him being like the Shohei Ohtani of like the NFL, right? Because it's going to be really hard to be elite at both spots. Now, we have had comments from the general manager. We've had comments from a lot of guys that he's just going to play every snap both ways. Okay, guys, well, we'll see if he did it in college quite often. We'll see if he can do that in the NFL. I think is a little bit different of an animal. I will say with Hunter, Ian, I am out more on a limb. He's my number 44 player overall. I'm a big believer in his talent, but you're at 67 in the rankings. Waz is at 52, so closer to me. Wet blanket AKA Matthew Friedman. He's at 83, because he doesn't believe in anything until it actually happens. So he's my wide receiver 22 overall. He's your 33rd. Waz is 25th, and Friedman's 36. So you and Friedman a little bit closer, although you're not a wet blanket as much as Friedman. And then me and Waz are a little bit closer. So we're kind of split, in the ranks. And I can see it both ways, man. I really could see it for Hunter going either way, because let's be honest, there's no way we can predict this playing time. There's just really not. If he comes out, though, and plays 85% on offense, you're going to be happy with him where you're taking him. If he plays 60%, you're going to be like, man, I hate Dwain. Why did he tell me to draft Travis Hunter so early in fantasy drafts? I should have listened to Ian.
It's one of these things where he is starting to move to a point where I'm down to start drafting him more often, because his ADP was really close to that wide receiver 20 mark. Now he's sitting as a wide receiver 28 over at Underdog Fantasy. Wouldn't be surprised at all if Jalen Waddle leaps him a little bit soon. George Pickens is going right behind him. So we could actually be looking at more of a wide receiver 30 type of option, and I can get behind that more, Dwayne. It was more so that low-end wide receiver 2 cost, because, again, I don't doubt Travis Hunter's talent, but I need more than that. Jameson Williams, Devonta Smith, these guys are really freaking talented too, all right? Every wide receiver we're considering taking with the top 30 pick is very talented, some more than others, I will admit that and everything. But again, it's just the pure bet on talent when we have such a playing time question and honestly an offense question, okay? Good for Liam Cohen. How many people knew who Liam Cohen was 12 months ago, for the most part, Dwayne, all right? He did a good job in Tampa Bay. I'm not trying to take that away. I'm not necessarily going to give him credit for making Chris Godwin and Mike Evans good football players. I'm not going to give him credit for Bucky Irving reversing field and breaking 10 tackles out here, okay? I agree. Liam Cohen is a good upgrade. I'm happy they got him, but I'm just not willing to say, oh, yeah, Godwin and Mike Evans. Why can't that just be Travis Hunter in year one? We've only had 12 rookie wide receivers post top 24 numbers over the past decade. More recently, I'm willing to, side with the sort of idea that tight ends and wide receivers, as college football offenses get more sophisticated, they're more NFL ready coming out. But again, a lot of questions for me as that low-end wide receiver 2, more so the mid-tier wide receiver 3. I can get more fully behind that. So I think we're going to end up being, around the right place. But hey, Dwayne, if he's going wide receiver 28, this must be one of your most drafted wide receivers of the offseason so far.
He is. He's one of my most drafted. And man, I just keep buying him like he's going down. I was buying him at the high price tag. And like we've talked about before, like, guys, it's going to come down to the site that you're drafting on. If you're drafting over at ESPN, he's like wide receiver 28. Yahoo, he's sitting here at wide receiver, or sleeper is wide receiver 35. Looking at him over on Yahoo. You guys can see all of this over at fantasylife.com on our handy dandy ADP tool. If we look at him over there, he's at wide receiver 26. So somewhere between high-end wide receiver 3 to mid-range wide receiver 3 is where he's going on most of these sites now. And you mentioned it, Ian. He's even come more into line over these last few weeks over on Underdog as well. And I think that there's the potential for us continuing to hear these storylines about the playing time both ways. To your point, I think he might even fall a little bit more. I like the call of Jalen Waddle potentially passing him with Jonnu Smith gone. Now, we did get Darren Waller, Ian. We've got Darren Waller on the Miami Dolphins. So I'm with you. I think there's a couple of other players that could pass him. And to your point, like, I love Travis Hunter, and I like making a bet on a guy that can like change my fantasy season, and I think he is one of those. But there are, to your point, other really talented players going around him. Like Jalen Waddle has been a wide receiver 2 every year of his career except for last year. If you look at Chris Olave, he has not been a wide receiver 2 every year of his career, but his underlying data points have said that he's a wide receiver 1 almost every single year of his career. He just hasn't been able to run pure in health, had a lot of and kind of unlucky with some of the deep field targets from him and Derek Carr. You talked about it on the Saints show. It seemed to always work out for him and for Shaheed and Derek Carr, but then whenever it would come to Olave getting wide open, making a sick move, getting down the field, like Derek Carr would miss it. That's just sometimes the breaks, these the randomness of the things that can happen in a sport like football, which obviously trickles down to fantasy. So I totally understand, where you're coming from. I still think that Travis Hunter will end up being one of my most drafted players. And here's the big reason why. If he does come out here and play 85, 90% on offense, I do think that he can be one of these guys that can change your season. And we have seen more of these really high-end prospects, which he grades out as, like what we talk about with Jamar Chase, what we talk about with Malik Neighbors, come in and immediately be these wide receiver ones. He's not quite on their level, but he's just below them. So I really do like him. And again, it's hard to know, like, how good would he have been in college, like if he just played offense full time? We don't know. Yeah. Of course, you can turn around and say, well, he's not going to play. He's going to play defense in the NFL too. So does it really matter? Like, he's still going to have to split time. So we could go on and on about Travis Hunter. The biggest thing, guys, very, very talented player. And if it runs out the right way for you, I think you're going to be super happy to have him on your roster.
Last point I want to talk about here is the fact that you do have Brian Thomas Jr., the highest of any Fantasy Life ranker. He's your wide receiver 5. I'm just a little bit behind you at wide receiver 7. So for me, I just prioritize Nico Collins and Malik Neighbors over him because I think, again, they're not dealing with the quote-unquote generational talent that is Travis Hunter and their offenses. I can see them racking up 30 or 40 more targets. So what is it about BTJ that makes you, again, rank him ahead of Nico and Neighbors? Two other guys who I do think are every bit as good as football as Brian Thomas Jr.
Well, I think it's just it's just what we started with. I think this is going to be consolidated around Brian Thomas Jr. and
Those
Travis
other two
Hunter. I don't think we're really going to have to worry about a third. Well, right, but I like Brian Thomas Jr. slightly better than those other guys. So I like his talent profile slightly better. They're all really good. I like them all. But Brian Thomas Jr., like, I love him. So I mean, I've got him slightly ahead of Nico Collins. Someone wants to draft Nico Collins ahead of. I mean, look, you know me, and I'm following a data-driven process. They're all really close. I've talked about this like 20 times at this point. It's a great year to be alive in fantasy football because we have so many young elite talents. You can make an argument that Malik Neighbors should be graded ahead of Brian Thomas Jr. and Nico Collins. You can make an argument that Nico should be graded at the top. You can make an argument that Brian Thomas Jr. should be graded at the top. What it really comes down to is they're all really good young wide receivers, and we should be happy to be drafting any of them. We just happen to be doing a show, and we do fantasy football for a living, and we are forced to make these choices. In reality, they're all in a tier together, right? I think they're all in a tier together, and it won't surprise me if any one of them like finishes as the wide receiver 2 overall in fantasy football this year. I think they all have that type of ceiling.
Last point I will throw out, Diami Brown, someone you mentioned before who is fine enough. If there is a scenario where Travis Hunter's route rate is more like 60% than the 85, 90% we're hoping for, you would think that is going to make Diami the guy to benefit. So again, generally, guys, I'm fine using my last like 6 picks in fantasy drafts all on handcuff running backs, all right? You do not necessarily need to have this even split going back and forth. If you are going to be looking at the late round wide receiver waters, though, there's only 4 guys going, just usually outside the top 150 picks or around there, making at least 8 figures annually. Not everything, but I think it helps at that point in the draft. Diami Brown is one of them, along with Josh Palmer, Tutu Atwell, and Darius Slayton. So again, someone where at the very end of drafts, literally like the last couple rounds, Diami Brown, their worst dart throws out there. All that said, Dwayne, again, we think Travis Hunter is really good. We think BTJ is really good. So maybe, just maybe, the stars are aligning for Trevor Lawrence to be really good and be less of someone who, again, we just wonder when he can put it all together. So still very young in the game and everything. The fact that this dude remains just 25 years old is absolutely wild to me. But thoughts on Trevor Lawrence potentially making a leap and finally living up to that generational billing?
Yeah, and one last point on the receivers you just called out, which I thought is a really good point. But it does come down to your format. If you're in best ball, those are great picks with your last pick because just 1 or 2 times, guys, in the season, they're going to spike and you probably get to use them in your lineup. If you're playing in a managed league, you're playing in a redraft league, we're not touching those guys. You'll never know when to start them. You're not going to be able to use them. You might end up picking them up some point in the year for a bye week or somebody else gets hurt. They could eventually end up on the free agent, waiver wire column by Miss Kendall Valenzuela. She might be telling you to pick one up for a spot start, but really more best ball picks at the end of drafts. Now, Trevor Lawrence, Ian, it's now or never, man. It's now or never. His fantasy points per game last year, obviously dealing with some injuries, 14.9. That's as low as it's been since his rookie year when he had 13.1. But the 2 years in between, pretty decent. 18.0, 18.6. That's going to put you right there in that borderline low-end QB1 territory, which is where Lawrence has been. But, I mean, we just talked about Brian Thomas Jr. We talked about, what we're thinking about with Travis Hunter. And then we've got Liam Cohen, to your point. Who knew who Liam Cohen was? But he was good last year, so we'll give him a little bit of credit. I'm with you. More Jimmy Joes than X's and O's, but we know the X's and O's, when married perfectly with the Jimmies and Joes, we do know that there are play callers like Sean McVay, like Kyle Shanahan, that have proven, like time in, time out, that they can get more out of players. So I just look at it this way. We've got the best two playmakers. Yeah, you move on from Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk, but those are just more move the chains guys. These are two guys that can score from anywhere on the field. You can use them underneath. You can get them in the intermediate game. You can use them over the top. And, man, it's just going to be a lot for defenses to handle, to handle both of those wide receivers. And so when I look at what we have with Trevor Lawrence, like, he's never really lived up to being this elite passer, to your point, that we hoped we were getting when he went QB1 overall in the draft, but he's good. Like, so I grade him in that range of a guy that's going to throw 250 to 274. He's thrown for 251 and 242. Those are his two best years. So maybe I'm slightly giving him an edge there. But again, it comes back to having these two really good playmakers at wide receiver. But the other big part is in those 2 years I just talked about, Ian, as a passer, he also had his 17 and 21 rushing yards per game with 4 and 5 rushing touchdowns in those seasons. And so we've talked about this in the past. We too often get locked into this, pocket passer or a guy that can run. And really, there's a blend of these things. And Trevor Lawrence is a great example of that. When you start going back and looking at guys that can throw for 250 to 240 yards, but rush for under 10 yards per game, like the hit rate of putting up a 22 plus fantasy point season, it's like nothing. It was like 1 in 66 or something like that. I gave you the trivia question the other day, but when you suddenly add on that they could be somewhere between a 10 plus to a 20 yards rushing per game, which Trevor Lawrence has shown he can do, the hit rate really moves up at your shot at having that 22 plus fantasy points per game. Why we use that number, guys, is that is the average for a top 3 quarterback since 2011 is 22 fantasy points per game. It also represents a 20% advantage over the low end QB ones in your league, which is basically QB 10 to QB 12. So it is a difference maker. And so when I look at Lawrence, Ian, the big thing that's never really worked out for him, he's had some okay yardage seasons, but man, his touchdowns per attempt for his career at 4%. The NFL average is 4.6, right? With these playmakers, can we at least just get to 4.6, Trevor Lawrence? So, look, some of that comes down to being willing to push the ball down the field and do the things you need to do. But, man, I've learned from you, because you've put up some of the best Trevor Lawrence cut-up videos of the dude actually making those kind of throws we're talking about. And for whatever reason, man, the wide receiver is just not seeing the ball well, or whatever it is, not coming down with the ball. And we were talking about some absolute dimes down the field in the end zone, lots of different things that really worked against Trevor Lawrence. So I want to believe in him as a passer. I've been a Trevor Lawrence naysayer the last 2 years, but I am coming around, Ian. The ceiling floor model for fantasy life gives him a ceiling of 22.9 and a median of 17.6. That makes him a guy that I am targeting a whole lot in fantasy drafts. So if you miss out on the top 4 elite quarterbacks, and maybe you don't get one of the middle guys that you like a Bo Nix or Caleb Williams, man, I'm really looking at a guy like Trevor Lawrence, going to be one of my most drafted quarterbacks this season.
The 2023 near miss mixtape was particularly egregious. Him and Calvin Ridley just could not quite get there. And I know everyone, these guys are throwing 500-600 passes a year. To some extent, you can make this for any quarterback out there. I'm just telling you, as someone who takes a lot of pride in watching nearly every single snap of every NFL season, it has been far worse with T-Law than pretty much anyone else out there over these past 2 years. And that Bears game last year, they dropped 4 different touchdowns. And yes, a couple of them came on the same drive, but really has just been wild. The supporting cast, Dwayne, it's similar to kind of the argument that I think we were talking about with Daniel Jones, talking through the Colts and just not really having that difference maker, okay? We got BTJ last year. That is awesome, and that's why we're getting excited about the future. But before that, it was Christian Kirk being like our savior here, okay? Oh my God, we got Zay Jones now. We're giving him 120, 130 targets. Evan Ingram was the thing there that T-Law actually helped make happen. So overall, I've referenced this before, my supporting cast rating, just taking all the PFF team offensive grades except for passing. Last 4 years, Jaguars have ranked 28th, 20th, 30th, and 25th. So it does seem like, again, given Cohen, given some of the upgrades at wide receiver, and hopefully the offensive line as well, even running backs could have an opportunity for T-Law to finally live up to the hype. So I haven't drafted as much of him as you, Dwayne. It's more so just been a reality where when we're in that stage of the draft, he's going next to guys like Tua Tagovailoa and CJ Stroud. And I've just been drafting more Nico Collins and the Dolphins wide receivers than these Jaguars guys. But in terms of where he's ranked and just the potential upside, I am with you. That whole range, though, Jordan Love, Justin Herbert, I just feel like there are so many more quarterbacks in that mid-tier QB2 range where we can actually, again, talk ourselves into the true dual threat upside that can give us the boom QB1 season. So would I like to see, a top 10 finish so far after 4 years of his career? But again, still so young. And when you do take out the Urban Meyer-induced debacle that was that rookie year, the numbers overall in terms of EPA and completion percentage over expected and that stuff do begin to look just a little bit better. So I am tentatively buying the T-Law true breakout. Dwain is all in. Now, Dwain, the other big star of the offseason here in Jacksonville has been 4th-round rookie RB Bhayshul Tuten, who seemingly is just set up to have this workhorse 400-touch role. Oh, wait, maybe he's going to be the RB3 in his own offense. We got Travis Etienne there. We got Tank Bigsby, who looked like the best rusher on the freaking team last year. And we got a guy in Liam Cohen, who, again, we are expecting to help out this overall offense and accordingly the rushing attack. So thoughts on Etienne, Tuten, and Bigsby and who you have been prioritizing in early drafts?
Well, look, it's an ambiguous backfield, so we really do want to attack it. It could go any one of these ways. I'm going to give you the way I think it's going to play out, and it could be completely wrong, right, guys? Like we try to do the best we can with these things. I think based on what we're hearing, Etienne is going to lead things early. And I think the nice thing with Travis Etienne is that if he plays well early, Ian, he is a guy that we've seen that can play all downs, right? He can handle that short yardage work. He can handle the in between the tackles work, the stuff between the 20s. He's a guy that can be pretty good on pass downs as well. He's shown that. Now, having said all that, like we've gotten 12.3 fantasy points his rookie year. Then we got 16.4, which was really good. Last year, it fell down to 8.8. And efficiency, while we talk about how fluky it can be and how sometimes it just doesn't matter for fantasy and it's not always sticky, but the trends that we're seeing here for Mr. Etienne are not ideal. And we never know if it's something that the coaches are looking at and that they care about. But his yards per carry has gone from 5.1 to 3.8 to 3.7. Yards after contact, 3.1 to 2.9 to 2.5. Missed tackles forced, 26%, 25% down to 11%. Rushing yards over expected per attempt, 1.07 down to minus 0.29, minus 0.28. Now, explosive 12, 8, and 11%. The NFL average is 9.5%. And that kind of lines up with what we saw from Travis Etienne in college. The problem is it just doesn't feel like he does that very well on his own. It's got to kind of be like, okay, the lane is perfectly lined up and then boom, he's going to hit the play. The positive is his targets per route run have gotten better every year. It was a 20% last year. So of these guys to start the season, I think he's the most complete back. But I do think that early in the year, you could see Bigsby still the carries inside the 5. He was really good at that. And Bigsby was a good player last year. I know people talk about how there's really a few games like just inflating everything. But, man, I watched a lot of Tank Bigsby. Guys, he looked good more than just on those few plays. I think that Tank Bigsby, now he's nothing in the receiving game. He's maybe worse than nothing. Like if there's something that's below a 0, like it might be Tank Bigsby. So the problem with him is if we make the bet on him, we're really saying, hey, in best case scenario, he turns into their lead early down back. He scores all the touchdowns, and one of these other guys handles the receiving down role. So I'm fine drafting some Bigsby, but overall, that makes it a tough profile for him to really hit the super high ceiling we want. So I think early in the year, though, you'll see him score some touchdowns. I do think, though, that by the time the year is over, Tuten will have worked his way into this backfield, and I think he is potentially leading it. We cannot say that that is going to happen for sure, Ian, but we've just seen it so many times with these ambiguous backfields. By the end of the year, it is the young ascending player. Now, Tuten's got to do his part. Like, he can't be fumbling, which was a problem. Already has been a problem in training camp. There's no quicker way for a coach to put you in a doghouse. I'll never forget when I was all in on David Wilson one year way back in the day because of like how explosive he was, and he fumbled in the first game, and Tom Coughlin literally just buried him. Tom Coughlin was like, it's over. Your career's over. And then unfortunately the next year, David Wilson suffered a neck injury. I thought he was going to be a really good player. But when we look at Tuten, man, here's the things to like. So supermodel rating, 71 overall. Remember, guys, everything's on a scale of 50, 100. Draft capital wasn't great. Early 4th round pick, so he gets a 58 in that. But production in college, which was an 80. His film grade was an 80. His speed score, 93. Best speed score in the class, right, of 118. 18% of this guy's carries in college went for 10-plus yards. Guys, that is absolutely elite. And he also had a 17% targets per route run for his career, which is really good. I know people go, well, 22% is good for your career. That's counting your freshman year, your sophomore year, when you're having to battle other upperclassmen and people for opportunities. So when I look at Tuten, I think that he's got like the things I want. I think he can play in the pass game. I think he gives you the explosive playmaking. So I think eventually it is him, Ian. Can I say when it's going to happen? No, but he is the Jaguar that I've been drafting the most, especially in best ball.
I do get a little concerned about the receiving stuff. How did this dude only have 81 yards on 23 catches last year? Tank Bigsby might have managed more yards with 23 catches last year. He probably would have dropped an extra 10 passes. I get it. I have not personally gone back and watched every single reception, so that's some homework for myself to do. But, man, it does scream a little bit Kamani Vidal to me. Now, not saying that there have been other late rounders to work out, and particularly I know what you're saying, like second half of the season play, we're not expecting him just to take over this situation in week one. I hear you, but I do just, again, worry if he's almost a little bit in that Bigsby, like, hey, it could be a problem getting that 3-down workhorse role because, yeah, what did we see with Liam Cohen last year? It took 16 weeks of watching Bucky Irving be straight up better than Rachaad White each and every game out there, and a backbreaking fourth quarter fumble for White for him to finally pass the torch over to Bucky Irving. Okay, so he got there, and maybe that's going to be Tuten in the fantasy playoffs, and you'll be, Tuten your way to a fantasy title. That would be fantastic. Don't get me wrong, but for me, man, it's Travis Etienne. We've seen this dude actually return RB1 value in the real world. Fantasy football, I guess, would be the better way to say that. But man, when we can't actually wrap our mind around why last year went bad, it was a shoulder injury. It was a hamstring injury both before week 6. Previously, again, we have seen this guy win both with explosiveness and with the raw volume. If anyone is going to take over a 3-down role in this backfield, it will be Travis Etienne. And that's not bad, just realistic outcome for a guy going as the RB33 in drafts. So has it been Etienne that you've been drafting the most out of the 3?
While I could see like folks saying Etienne is the best bet in the backfield, and I can't necessarily argue it for week 1, Ian, I'm still really drafting Bhayshul Tuten as the guy I want the most. When I look at the ADPs, ESPN, Etienne goes 114, Tuten's at 141, Etienne on Sleeper 97, Tuten 160, Yahoo Etienne 115, a little closer, Bhayshul Tuten at 127. Obviously on Underdog, where we get people going hyper crazy, it's actually Bhayshul Tuten at 127. Etienne at 101, but Tank Bigsby behind Tuten. So can't say for certain which way it's going to go, but the way I'm thinking about it is if it does break right, in the scenario it breaks right, like Tuten's the one that I want to have on the team.
For what it's worth, if I was drafting right now in ESPN Yahoo leagues, I too would be drafting more Tuten at that discrepancy. But for now, I will continue to hang my hat on the ETN bandwagon. Let's talk about the last, fantasy viable star. I guess we call him that here in Jacksonville. Dwain, is Brenton Strange, the new tight end one with Evan Ingram out of town. Look, good prospect, has day 2 draft capital, turned in 4 separate top 12 finishes last year. It's just one of these things where I wonder. I don't even know what the level of excitement is. Maybe I'm just too in the weeds with this, but is Brenton Strange anything more than just decent enough low-end tight end 2?
Low-end tight end 1 worthy numbers last year. I mean, he's a year 3 guy. You mentioned it, round 2 pick, number 61 out of Penn State. 20% targets per route run and 1.49 yards per route run last year. Those are both low-end tight end 1 worthy numbers going back to 2011. The challenge is we just added Travis Hunter to the offense to go along with Brian Thomas Jr. So I think he's the 3rd target on the team. And if by some chance Travis Hunter plays way less offense than what we think, I like Brenton Strange to give me, fantasy production from the tight end spot more than I probably like Diami Brown on a consistent basis to give me fantasy production from the wide receiver spot. And again, it's just betting on the upside of an unproven talent that did show a little bit at the end of last year. But yeah, just more of a late round dart, somebody that most people are not going to be drafting in their home leagues in. But like we like to talk about, playing in a tight end premium, you're certainly drafting Brenton Strange. Playing in a league like Best Ball where you need a 2nd or a 3rd tight end, I think that's where he's in play. Specifically, is like Ian likes to say, when you're stacking them up with someone like Trevor Lawrence.
Biggest thing I think you can kind of build a bull case for Strange is the fact that Liam Cohen did basically just leave Cade Otton on the field all the time last year. We're talking about an 87% route rate, 3rd highest mark of any tight end in the league, and the only real competition for Strange, Johnny Mutt and Hunter Long, 2 very much block first options throughout their respective careers. So Brenton Strange, again, go ahead, rank him top 20. Rank him top 16 if you're feeling crazy, Dwayne. But again, I think we're just talking about more so this later round dart with a stack, as you said, or someone where, again, maybe it's more of of a tight end premium. Okay, now I can get a little bit more excited. But speaking of getting excited, let's go ahead and move on to our final segment, Dwayne. It is the time for the win total. We are resting at, let's see, just 7.5, a mark which, yes, they have failed to pass in 11 of the last 14 seasons. Pretty problematic, to say that out loud, because I'm taking the over anyway. I do think that there's, again, enough talent coming up on the offensive side of the ball to complement a defense that, look, such a volatile kind of group when you're looking at any team defense. How are they going to go from one year to another? I like to focus on the ones that have, a potential to be elite at the line of scrimmage. I do think that's what we have here with, Josh Hines Allen, and then, everyone else they have going, Travon Walker, people of that nature. So given the over, it's just 7.5. Honestly, I'm surprised this couldn't be a markup. 7.5, I will take that. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, hasn't been good if you go back long-term history, but 2 out of the last 3 years they have beat this mark. They won 4 games last year, but it was 9-9 the 2 before. So I'm going with the over as well. Gonna believe in the step forward with Trevor Lawrence with the addition of Travis Hunter.
Gotta love that. And gotta love you out there for listening to another edition of the Fantasy Live Show. We'll be back with many more team previews. I invite you to like and subscribe if you are into that kind of thing. But otherwise, just have a great rest of your day. For Dwayne, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Live Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.